all right, all right. Wholeness and balanced vibrations, everyone. We are forward, as I always say, into another fantastic episode of GLM. It is season 2. It's all the way lit. We're ready to get in here and do some big things. Now, of course, I'm joined by the prestigious key makers, Kamal, Dominic, Chris. We're here to show all perspectives of the high level knowledge. So I know right away you're probably thinking, what's going on with the sunglasses? Well, I'll tell you, 16 years under the lights, you want to definitely preserve your eyes as much as you can. So y'all getting the sunglasses from here on out because it is daytime. As you can see, sunshine on me. So yeah, just so you're not asking yourself the question the whole time. Now, the first thing is that I wanted to mention, just for everyone that's getting the opportunity to catch these GLM episodes, what is really the purpose of this segment. And we felt that we wanted to bring something that just embodied more of the wholeness that we're constantly bringing. So as many know, we have the tribe, and the tribe gets together every other Sunday and actually Wednesday now. But every other Sunday, we have these fantastic bills, which are just continuations of the knowledge that I've been bringing. And we're still going all the way up and expanding with that. But that's heavy level occult knowledge. And to me, you do really even need to be a bit more on point about whether you want to just share that with YouTube at large. I mean, of course, we drip a lot of stuff, but some of our builds are very intimate. They're very tuned in and dialed in specifically for the moment. And we respect the space. And so all of that is in the university. And also, we have another engagement, which we just added because we really wanted to make sure that tribe members and ambassadors are getting to know more and more about each other. And also that we have a space that doesn't really have a directive per se, but just paying attention to everybody that is inside that space. And so we call that tribe gathering, and that's happening every other Wednesday. So that's really filling our plate with a lot of what is needed just to accomplish the 360 approach at spiritual and mindful lifestyle systems, if you may. And this one, though, is to fill the void of, okay, well, I'm not sticking my head in the sand. I do want to know about the most important things that are going on around me, even if they're not necessarily so what people will call positive. I definitely want to be informed. And also even the trends and what's going on, the trends and what's happening in the world, that's actually something that billions of people are paying attention to. What is our perspective on that, especially as being at this stage of enlightenment? And so we'll put it like that. So now you know how we're getting this 360 omniscient kind of view on just consciousness and life and existence all together, and what each space is for. So of course, if you're hearing certain things come forth today and you're like, I want to get back on the spiritual topic, well, there's tons of videos for that, and they're glorious. And then also, if you want that real time, you can jump into the university. So, just beginning off in this today, we wasn't playing when we came in. So I wanted to, kind of get the key makers warmed up right now with a recap. And, because when we're coming in, we're not just covering, again, any random topic that's happening right now. What we're dealing with is only the meat. So whatever we were talking about, even when we do recaps, there should be some additional connection to what we were building on, because it's more of like a infinite knowledge build, more so than, hey, just information here, like news, and then an event happens and then we got more information. We really want to put it all together, and see what it's saying to all of us. So we left off last talking about the black box. And, that was a huge revelation, if you may, just in general, especially for me, of understanding that there are things that operate inside the reality that factually no one really knows how it operates, or few people, maybe 1%, less than 1% may even know how it operates, but we're using it. And to me, that's kind of like, I guess if I would be a person that gets startled, it would be kind of startling, because you're like, wait a minute, we're using something y'all don't even know, how it works. It's like, no, it just works, just use it yourself. And it's like, well, that could be somehow a gateway for like other things to enter into the reality, or it could even show us where there could be areas that we have something going on that we may have not looked at as a collective. And so I wanted to start off today by just kind of jumping into, my latest, I would say, productivity tool here. And this is just something that allows us to begin to go through our huge repository of images rapidly and be able to connect it into the stuff that we're building on. So I'll be actually playing DJ back here, as the gentlemen are coming in today, and I'll be shuffling through and mixing through some of these images that are relevant to what we're talking about. And this is all coming from the custom homegrown Secret Energy library, if you may, or in my case, it's the 7 library of all the stuff that I've collected throughout this time about consciousness as far as images are concerned, and then also screenshots of old or rare books where it explains something. Like in this case, we were talking about Black Box last time we jumped in. Kamal was saying, hey, right away, it made him think about the Kaaba. And I had some notes here that were also saying, hey, it is also like the Kaaba, because in many ways, there are people who are even circumambulating the Kaaba and even, worshiping around the Kaaba, but they don't actually really know what it means, hence the term black box. And this states that the Kaaba of Mecca, called the Makkah or the egg, denotes the equinoxes or the equinox. It's the foundation of the 4 quarters. And with the addition of the height and the depth of the body, this would be identical with the hexagram or cube of path. Okay. And it says the Kaaba was fabled to have been first let down from heaven to Adam and to have been remodeled by Seth, Abraham, and others. A knowledge of these things, Kabiri, the Keb or the egg, the mount of the 7 of the chariot, the celestial, and the circling of the inclining of the 4 corners, the Kaaba constituted thus the true primary Kaaba. Okay, so I'm just reading off of some of the excerpt here. It may appear just a little bit different in the text, but this is that deeper aspect of things like the cubes that we may not directly know about, people worshiping may not directly know about, but are present within the cult, and what the information is bringing forth there. And this is what we want to also let everybody know, is that we bring this deep level of knowledge and we connect it. And that's what allows us to be so solid in the times that we're actually living in. I'll make a final note here, before I open this up, and just mention that the cube in itself, as we can see through ancient times, and this picture's kind of sideways. Let me kind of spin it around real quick, or you can kind of see it like that. This was taken from the Book of Aleppo, where there is a secret society. It's a very thick book, but there are secret societies that are already pledged to the Kaaba or the shrine. And this book consisted of at least 600 to 1,000 men in business class inside of the United States. There's another image here of, apparently you're not supposed to actually be inside the Kaaba. It's supposed to be sacred and holy. However, this was some pictures of showing that some of the sheiks, etc., if you pay or if you're known enough, that you can actually get into the Kaaba and see what's inside, and also, touch the shrine, which of course is a meteor that fell from the sky. They say from the crown of an angel. So these are all the things that we're talking about that's like black box stuff, because no one really understands this. As you're seeing the Kaaba and Mecca back in old days, and you're seeing men from different countries even present, you're seeing really one of the deepest secret societies, especially from, the cult of Amun and a lot of the other stuff that we've been cracking through. Lastly, there was one big thing, and that's just that all of these structures, and we just, went over this again in last Tri-Vibes, but all of these structures that have anything to do with power are always mimicking the masculine and feminine aspects. So in that way, you can make this as much of a mystery as you want, especially with the geometry and, all of the lore around it. But it is important for people to know that this is still a monument of man and woman, if you may, and that the core purpose is for you to understand how these mysteries apply to you directly, not necessarily to something external that you could be wandering after, right? So yeah, let's just kind of, on the recap of the black box. Did you have anything over there? I know I saw some notes that you had also, Kamal.
Yeah, the black box, honestly, it's kind of wild thinking about it, because you have the black box, which also relates to the box, which relates to the cross and the symbol of us being crossed into this realm, into this reality in general. So it's, as we start to unpack that, it's very directly like this is personal business, you know. And I love how you were saying, some of it, even though it feels very external, we see these external representations of it. This is also the study of what it means to be able to reverse engineer what's going on with the science of the soul, you know, and that often doesn't get the respect. I feel like, especially when you get too into the science world, you don't really get the respect of how much of a science it really is. Um,
And that's interesting because that's actually what spirituality is supposed to be, right? You're supposed to use all these signs and symbols and nature and everything to teach you how to decode yourself, right? But again, this is what can happen when the black box scenario where there's so much mystery around things and nobody really being put the task to figuring it out and then also explaining it to everyone else. We noticed that these paths of, like, let's say adepts is like there's only a few adepts when it doesn't really need to be that way. All we need to do is start schools of adepthood and show people like what are the options and what you can really do with this career path, if you may. And then I'm sure we'll have plenty of people that say, oh, yep, that's exactly what I want to do in my life. How cool, right? Because I don't think there's any child that doesn't grow up seeing even superheroes and this kind of thing and want to adapt to that power or have some type of power controlling your dreams and this kind of thing and want to explore that more, right? Again, because this is a recap, we're going to speed through this. We also have the tourists that we talked about, in this, all this stuff, is happening now. It kind of happens. And then because news is kind of governing how things is coming across, it's almost like once the tariff thing settled and then, they kind of back down a little bit, even though they're really higher than what they used to be on most areas. Now we're on to something else already, right? But one of the things that I wanted to just speak to is that the U.S. brand has been damaged. And we need to realize that, like, the whole world is not waiting on the United States to figure out when they're going to not be like maniacs with everybody else all the time, right? And it's truly like there's a word, and it basically, this word hints to when you promise people that things are going to be like they used to be, you can garnish a lot of people's interest because some people, when they're going through bad situations, they just want to go backwards and make things like they used to be, if you know what I mean. And so that's definitely some of the energy that I feel is being fed on right now, is that there is this idea of going back to even colonial times. And some people are even thinking, yeah, maybe it may be better for me there, right? Because, a lot of the citizens of society, let's just face it, have been kind of droned out and been thought for. And so it almost like seems to them to be a good idea to kind of reverse a lot of what we've done so far to bring so many freedoms, if you may, liberties. All those words are a bit loaded, but to bring those into the reality more, you know what I mean? Rather than hierarchies just being the ones themselves controlling things.
yeah, I feel like that was definitely well said. Um, Chris, did you want to say anything to that? Because I know you had also sent me some things about the Saturn connection to the cube and everything as well, and I feel like it kind of ties into some of this discussion.
Oh yeah. Well, for sure. I'm playing hot potato with the with it, but yeah, I think the one thing I wanted to demystify for people is the superstition. Because when I woke up and I started learning all about the cube and all about the Kaaba and just kind of the shrouded mystery behind all that, it was very like to be feared. And the cube is you're like in the cube and you can't get out and stuff like that. And it's sort of like that seems so unsophisticated compared to what we know now. And like why do and then some people do worship it, like they be walking around with it, on their forehead or something like that. And it's like, okay, well, to me, that's the masculine principle that they're trying to magnify. I mean, there's no curve or anything, and it does represent like this weird perfection, this geometric shape. I'm really into geometry, but to me, I just can't stand how it gets, you type in the black cube in YouTube and you're just going to get this endless kind of drivel of kind of conspiracy, like really shallow, esoteric, kind of like the basic girl astrology type info, And
Yeah.
so, for me, it's like, I'm so sick of that stuff. I'd much rather, change the perception of what people think this whole thing is about to begin with. But I'm still learning about it. So that's why I was like, I'm waiting for you guys to keep going on about it. I got some more stuff to say further down here.
For sure, for sure. We'll keep it moving, but as we know, for sure, the cube is the masculine symbol of the curve and the straight line, and the brotherhood, if you may, is in full effect in Islam, especially, and especially the latest version, which is a lot crazier than what people have even been able to see. So, from the standards of how women are treated now, especially in the Western world, and the divine feminine. I'm not even talking about just the all out harlotry or whatever else you see going on, but just the respect for the divine feminine. It is void virtually in that culture. There's a lot of fire, there's a lot of heat, there's less water, and there's a lot of warfare. And so we talked about before that whatever energy you're magnifying, that's bringing that into your life. And a lot of people, they just want that fire because it's energy, it's fuel, it's money, but they also don't take into account how it can burn things up. It can make you very angry. It could really delusion your whole perspective on exactly what it takes to be able to generate, which is having both of those two fields, right? And so, or just any two opposites, not just having that one. We're in a divided world, and that division is in two parts, right? So, this is the beauty of understanding such high level knowledge, is that you can see that all they've done is shrouded things in a lot of mystery, and it's created a lot of misunderstanding. And these misunderstandings have actually cost many people, even up to this very moment, this very second, their lives, right? So, this is a very serious thing that's going on. One of the things that I had next here was just to come back around on the legalese, because we discussed a little bit of the legal side of things, and Chris, opened up some of the stuff that's available in the university. And I just had one little interaction this strong, as we call it, rather than weak, that really reminded me personally of, just sometimes people think that they're in these countries, and that these countries are like their parents, and that they're supposed to be doing what they want them to do, like give me my water, give me my land and our rights and our votes. But they don't understand that these countries were conquered a long time ago, which we've already discussed, and are actually in the hands of the banking magnates and, different territories, armored forces, and all this kind of stuff throughout the world, China, Asia, all these different places that have own certain stake in certain things that maybe we're not at all privy to. But in that way, it's also important for everybody to remember that when a land is conquered, the people of the land are actually a part of what the new conqueror is expecting to reap some of the booty from, if you may, or to get some of the spoils of the land, is the people. So, of course, this system is the most advanced because it operates in a way to not allow people to see that is the obvious scenario, right? Like they just don't see it, because and it's important to talk about this, because a lot of people are not privy to the time where the controllers, if you may, got outnumbered, and they were no longer able to continue to hold up the shenanigans, and it was causing big insurrections inside of some of the cities, like major cities, Rome, Greece, etc., dealing with these large hordes of people. And so America was like the revised version. It wanted to bring forth different things, like what we would call the American dream. It wanted people to feel like they were free, because a free mind is more inventing. A free mind is more at leisure. And in that way, you will produce kids. Like, think about right now, where many people are just not having kids at all. They're like, shit, I'm not bringing any kids into this, right? Or for other reasons, even selfish reasons, but it's less kids than ever. We can just say that. Generally, within many of the cultures, especially Western culture, it's like maybe we have one child, maybe two, but definitely not 10 like it used to be back in the day, right? So what does that say? That the women don't really feel like, even on a subconscious level, that this is time to bring forth more children, or that more children will actually be of a greater benefit, versus we just came off of a time where people have bought into the dream so deeply that they had made their own home in it, and made their own space, got their home, their fence, and when they enter their house, they're in their own domicile, they make the rules, etc. And then you go out, you get to learn, and all these quote unquote rights, if you may, for more freedom, if you may. And that impacts the intellect. You think okay, I'm going to go and study. I don't have any oppression on me. So we need to realize that many people are having their rug pulled on them right now. Many of the conservative, if you may, and the people who didn't really listen to any of the conspiracies, or even feel like that was the kind of world that they're living in, because they were inside of that illusion that was painted in that dream, are all of a sudden not living in that world anymore, because there's overwhelming, alarming evidence showing that, hey, conspiracy theorists were right. There is actually something going on, and there's a lot of evidence to actually prove it. Yeah. So just kind of understanding the position is like, because many people, they feel like that the government and the state owes them something, but they don't realize that the government and the state were actually put there to, on behalf of the conquerors, to manage the asset. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think they're making it more. They're revealing it day by day. And my friend who just moved to Spain just went through that blackout there, and he was like, "Yeah, it was okay, for a while. If it had gone on any longer, there would have been some issues." But right after the fact, I just saw a video how they're being advertised to now about money that will work when the power does not work, and it's a central bank digital currency. And some magical way you can still do business while the power grid's down, which, power grid goes down. Hey, they can throw an excuse there all day. The guy hit the wrong button. The guy told you he was going to hit the wrong button, whatever they want to say. Right. But, so to me, people are like, there's going to be a group of people that go for that. Not to jump forward onto the financial stuff, but just the way they coerce society and manage society through this, what I just call the alien structure, the priestcraft now, which is also through the kingly craft, I guess you could say. And those are the two poles they keep people in all day, with either the money and the finance, or the politics and the religion, and how they've kind of, they've ripped people apart so thoroughly with that. And also to touch on what it says here about the bloodlines, really kind of orchestrating all this on top of the governments, and in America, if you follow the news right now, they're really pushing the race war stuff. And it's so depressing to see how effective it is, And I was like, man, we really could come together. There's like this really small group of people that it's like, I don't want to take it to that pitchfork and torch level or anything like that, but there's just so much to unite about. And I just saw this video of some celebrity accepting an award, and how she's been canceled after the award because she had a message of unity for the people. And I was just like, man, this unity message, it's like they're slowly outlawing it and shadow banning the concept of unity and the concept of coming together. And I was just like so sick of it. I was so happy to jump on today and talk with you guys about stuff, because it really does help me formulate my thoughts about how to go forward navigating these spaces, whether they're digital kind of prisons or whether it's kind of the open air land prison we got. Some of us got really nice ones, some of us got bad ones, So it's just such an important, all this stuff is so important to talk about. I'm sure Dominic wanted to chime in about
it.
Perfect timing, actually. So yeah, for me, a lot of my life is not really living within the news. So I actually appreciate these touch points because I'm able to just kind of update myself. But being in a park that seems like a microcosm of the macrocosm, is just watching how the people that run the show within our community are kind of playing out these same roles where they're taking advantage because they're in a position of power. So it kind of allows me to alleviate the blame game, or they, them, and just kind of asking myself, like, what am I doing to contribute to this? What are we doing to contribute to this? Little things like that, just kind of how I'm educating mom in terms of kind of like financial. I know this space has kind of helped us adopt a little bit of the cryptocurrency. So even kind of funnily enough, but learning how to think outside of the box, as far as like the box as the construct that we're taught to think in. So again, a lot of my understanding comes from really comprehension of language. So for someone that kind of is able to ignore, for lack of a better word, the current events, I really do appreciate this space, because it's like my own little news where I'm able to get my updates and then not be, what would you call it, a neophyte, kind of like Seven said, head in the sand, acting like nothing is happening, because stuff is happening. And to act like it's not, I think that would be the true definition of foolishness.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, and that's a good space for us to segue, just to first, we're going to take a quick commercial break, but we just want to let everybody know, this is In the Know 16 plus years. And what that means is that you know how to move through this matrix. You're not naive, but you're not so caught up in it that you've lost really what your mission is and what you're here to do. And it's also a very solid foundation. So this is most important. We also look into health. So our first sponsor today is going to actually be from the hydrogen molecular field. And this is because we have an amazing product. and it's just started trending. It had actually gone on to Joe Rogan with Gary Brecka and a few other places. Just the awareness of how much hydrogen heals the body, and that you can actually take a bath in it, and how a lot of your pains and even skin conditions and all these kind of things can be fixed with number one. So we're going to hear from that in just a little bit. Then we're going to come forward and we're going to jump right into the beginning of the show, because actually that was just a recap, but we want to make sure that you stay informed and that you also are in step with where we're going with this. So give us a quick moment and we'll be right forward. Wholeness.
Hydrogen gas, first of all, it's the lightest element in the universe. Hydrogen gas can go anywhere in the body. It reduces inflammation, improves circulation, improves memory, waking up not in pain, sleeping better.
Right now, for people, you can just go get these hydrogen bath bombs.
You can get these hydrogen bath bombs.
And where would you get one of those?
All right, and now we have returned, and of course, this is another fantastic journey that we're on, and we just got through with the recap of season 2, episode 1. Of course, this is episode 2, and we're diving right in. So today, we really have in front of us some financial stuff just right off, and it was interesting that Dom had brought that up right before the break. And it's also because, as you may or may not know, Bitcoin hit its all-time high again yesterday. Now, I can't tell you enough about the financial haters. I saw somebody after the show saying in the comments, hey, why even promote anything going on with Bitcoin? It's all going down. It's all messed up. And it's like, I've been hearing that since day one. And, that was like 2018 for me. And everything that we're looking at as far as analysts concerned are telling us something opposite. So we always talk about taking the emotion out of the game. We talk about Wealthybot, which is also up for an update here in a couple weeks. So that's going to be spectacular. But that's not what this is about today, even though you could check on that anytime you want. We want to also get into very briefly, first of all, that statement, money growing on trees, right? Like, remember your mom or your dad used to say, man, money doesn't grow on trees, right? That's an old school one, right? And there was actually an old book by Tracy Twyman. She's left the space, but she had a lot of knowledge. She definitely was involved in some crazy stuff, though. So, hey, it happens. But she has a book called Money Grows on the Tree of Knowledge, I believe. And it was an incredible work. But it does highlight that, hey, that money that people are touching is really talismans, is really necromancy, and has a lot to do with the ancient fertility cults of the past. But that's also not what we're actually here trying to talk about today. We're here to really just dive into the realization that, is it possible to have money that grows? So what I can say is that inside of the bank account, that the money being there does indeed shrink, right? Because they say, hey, the value of your dollar is going down further and further, especially as we go into a recession. However, even just holding some of the most solid cryptocurrencies have been able to produce scenarios where somebody may go back to their wallet and find that there's more cash. Now, we want to demystify altogether that most people think that cryptocurrency is like monopoly money or something that you can't spend it anywhere. I'm here to tell you that you can spend it everywhere. If you have it, someone will take it. So it is convertible, I guess the term should be. But I also wanted to bring awareness to just that, of course, we have to get it to a stage where we're managing our own finances and we're making decisions to do things that are going to actually create more of a legacy for yourself and for your family. It's like getting that vibration in. Like, you may say, oh man, I don't even have no money to put into that. So even if I put in $100, then that wouldn't be anything. And I want to let you know, because first of all, you should just get educated. Don't definitely go FOMO into any meme coins or anything like that. But listen to this. I have been tracking this notion that this society that we're also in, the matrix in itself, the fake matrix, I love to call it, to remove it one more layer from being anything like a matrix or a womb. But the fake matrix has been enriching certain groups of people so that it can lead to more of the crazy stuff like Chris was just reporting on, and even Dominic was reporting about many of these spaces being racially charged. And so what I mean by that also is that generally the ones who are bragging and the ones who are the most callous are generally the wealthiest ones, right? Because they have less to really be nice to anyone about, even though it should be vice versa. Unfortunately, generally the way that those people have gotten their financial wealth and gain has been through stepping on someone else. So they're used to that. So when you also make new millionaires or you mint new millionaires, they have a tendency to be a little nasty too if you cull them from a specific crowd. And what I'm seeing is, one, with the big advent of AI, a lot of those coder guys have become very wealthy because they for sure now understand how much they can do with something that can code even faster than them. And they got all these tech ideas and apps and things ready to jumpstart. So that's one group of people that have been taken to the next level. I've always said that, like the Burning Man crowd, especially the guys that are on the top of that, Gaia TV, On It Labs, all those guys, even Joe Rogan, et cetera, that they have been able to establish gaining the boon from the so-called conscious community and the billions of dollars that pass through it because they actually have businesses and things connected into this. But a lot of that is also connected into crypto. So I remember seeing many of the guys running around, even at Envision, et cetera, they had millions of dollars in Bitcoin and not really any plans on what they wanted to do with it. So again, we had a whole nother group that was super empowered and given a lot of money. The last one I actually wanted to mention here today is more of what I call the dog pack. And this is because I'm overwhelmingly seeing all the time in the occult arena the reference of dogs. I think that there's a huge underestimating of what dogs really are. I've always pointed out that, hey, K9 and Kanan and CNN and all that seems to go together, Big Five, Sirius and all this kind of stuff, that it seems to go together. And then I even posit one forward, like with Caleb and the Ka and et cetera, that it's possible that the spirits of dogs could be more or less the next graduated spirit before you get to a human, if you may, right? And I've also mentioned that I feel like that many of the Martian souls are actually dogs, and many of them are very warlike. And there's a lot of mention of this throughout occult works. However, what I want to say is that there's always groups of people that seem to gravitate more towards dogs than others. And we'll just kind of let others fill in the blanks there for themselves. However, for those who love those little doggies so much, like that little Shibu Shibu, or that little Doge, or that little Bonk, or that little Floki, 20,000x was coming off of some of these coins. So again, this is just like what I was saying about that the society can guide who is going to get wealthy based on things that you may not even consider as being real integers, especially from the level of whether you want to make investments or not. But I even heard one guy specifically say he decided that he was going to create this dog pack. And that when these new meme coins were dropping, the ones that would be the dog ones that would be ones that everybody's talking about, he just put like $1,500 or $1,000 or into those coins. And he slowly watched that go into the millions of dollars. Now, I can definitely tell you that when I was watching all the dog coins go through, I was like, shoot, I'm really a cat person. So I was once again letting my emotions and ideas determine what I was going to be investing in. That's why I say, hey, let Wealthybot take a lot of thinking out of the way. But needless to say, anybody who was kind of more inclined towards loving the doggies more and just putting their little token, little money into these coins, they are now rich. Or, some of them rolled it all the way up and came all the way down. But at some point, they had an extremely large amount of wealth for what they invested. There is nothing that I've seen that has a 26,000x like Shibu Inu did. So I wanted to mention this and kind of just open this up. I got a little bit more to talk about this on the crypto level, but I want to open this up to gentlemen and see if they have something just on what I'm talking about so far.
Well, I was just going to quickly say, I don't want to say no names, but someone I know put in a little bit of money into the Bitcoin. And then it's funny, it actually went up, ended up kind of plummeting down. But the way they were playing it is the same way I was advised in this space, is that to not be emotionally invested, don't put anything you're not willing to lose. And now that thing is up like 14,000. So, exactly. And again, just knowing that there's ways to facilitate it. The convertible term I really love, because I actually feel like it's even a benefit that you can't just go and necessarily take it right out, because it even allows you to sit on it, which
many came back to those wallets of what we call crumbs before, and found 20, 30K in those wallets based on how much some of these coins have went up. after many people had just gave up and just like, yo, I'm out. I lost all my money. But they had some crumbs still left. Some of them sold at the bottom and all that, but they just left the crumbs and they come back to a crumb wallet, and the crumbs have actually replaced everything that has been lost. So again, this concept of growing money is not one that's generally in the matrix at all. So it's one that you need to pay attention to and one that you need to think about, because obviously some of the final stuff is really like land, right? Like I've never, no matter what crazy stuff was going on, came back and found the land cheaper generally after 15 years. The ground itself is very abundant. Like, a lot of times we'd be acting too bougie, but like I was talking to my brother who works with the CMOS, et cetera, Akeem Pierre, sending wholeness to the brother. He was talking about crops that he's even finding in Costa Rica and some of the more tropical places that are expensive crops when it comes to that, like a jar of this particular herb, being sold worldwide. You can open up your own little thing and just, ship it locally or whatever, because this stuff is very expensive and you just are planting it though. And once you find get you 1 or 2 acres of land, now you have a lot. So it's really what we find more than anything is people that are misinformed and are not applying themselves and are watching too much of the narrative, versus being also still in the awareness that you're going to need to go and work though, because they want everything sometimes to be really easy. They want it to be given to them. They feel like they're even being owed, right? Like, yo, they owe me reparations, when in reality, it's actually just that ethic. And this is why some folks can come here from different countries. And I'm just saying, even wherever you go, like I even feel like me coming here to Costa Rica, like there's so many different things that are beneficial, mainly the wholeness, right? That's the one I'm benefiting on the most, right? So you could go to just different places and find there's a abundance of something that you may have been lacking somewhere else, even love, attention, and those kind of things. So it's always a good idea to, move in mysterious ways. The final thing about crypto here, one of the things that I've been noticing is obviously there's a lot of oversight right now around Donald Trump's, or Mr. T. I love that. Like that right there. Come on. A lot of things around Mr. T's financial moves. Like there's been the plane that was just given by Saudi Arabia, which, many are saying, hey, this is impossible. Could be bribing, all this kind of stuff. And then, of course, there's the Trump meme coin, which was damn near a rug pull. Melania coin was definitely a rug pull. I mean, it really shook the crypto community, even though meme coins were doing their thing. It was like a whole new thing to see the president actually rug pull an entire nation or other foreign countries, et cetera. But that did happen, and here we are. But there's something that, for me, the Trump meme coin is really the smoke screen to. And oftentimes when I hear like people talking about this in news and stuff, it's clearly that they're not informed about this either. It is actually the launch of USD1. So World Liberty Financial actually launched the token, and it was kind of set up more of like a DAO. So even the people who've invested in it, they're not necessarily promised that the coin is going to increase in value, because it says specifically in the white paper that you're not to buy it in the hopes that this is going to even be listed. So you have lots of people in here, because the coin still bought in roughly $300 to $400 million, I think even more. So you have people in here, it's like, hey, when is the coin going to be listed? So you always see them here talking about that. But what I wanted to focus on, though, is that they're still constantly pushing news about the adoption of USD1, which is basically a stable coin, but is pegged to the US Treasury. So look at what this says here. It says, now available to over 270 million people, because they get listed on Binance, just like a USDC and a USDT, but this just launched, right? And they're calling it USD1. Now, I'm not saying go and get this because this is a stable coin. You're not going to make money on this per se. There are ways to stake stable coins and that kind of things. But in this, I'm just bringing light to that. Apparently, from what I can see, is they took the 300 million, 400 million from World Liberty. They also then went and got 20 billion, which is, this is all listed. There's articles on this. 20 billion from the Arabs in Saudi Arabia to also go in on this. And now they have officially a stable coin. And so the meme coin thing is kind of like, again, the smokescreen for the realization that, but yeah, Trump and family, as long as there's a crypto or as long as there's a banking system, have enriched their families forever. because they have, in a very short period of a few months, not only been able to amass roughly $500 million in just inside of the crypto space, but also taking it a step further and now getting to a level like where USDT is, where of course USDT is a stable coin, and many often question, well, what's really backing this stable coin? Because sometimes USDT can mint 10 billion USDT. And this is something that I want to finish on this, because this is something you're going to see in the future. This is, again, one of my things. I'm like, yo, everybody's so slow. They're not even seeing what's happening. When the big pressure on USDT in the stable, in the community right now has been, again, is USDT audited? And also there's knowledge, and it's all published, that USDT had been backing USDT with US treasuries also. But it was really shaky and it still needed auditing and all that. And some people were saying like, hey, it could be real problems if USDT needs to now verify all of its books. You see what I mean? And a lot of these people are even from Hollywood, and there's people that are just in this, even USDT, that are like big names, right? So this has clearly become like a honeypot. I'm not sure if that's the right term, but there's a large amount of capital inside of this token. But there's a move that can be made within one moment to change this entire market. Two moves. And that is, one, that USDT be bought in to audit. And in that, there's a flight from USDT into other stable coins. That would be very ideal for the Trump Foundation. And if you look at the basis of USDT and the people that started that, you could see that it wouldn't be very far away from being able to make a move like that for its own interest and shift into something like USD1. And the second thing, let me just kind of think of it here, of how the markets have changed. Let me open it up for the guys, and I'm just going to think of my last thing about what I wanted to mention about how the markets can rapidly change. And that is, of course, if Larry Fink, which is built into the ETF Bitcoin contract, can get so many people into the ETFs, which is already huge right now. Bitcoin's price is because of the ETFs. Where if they deem that for some reason that Bitcoin is no longer safe for them, that they have a guarantee to be able to start a one-in-one pair with Bitcoin so that it becomes basically BlackRock's Bitcoin. Okay. And if that happens, we could potentially, and this could be the same thing as what happened with Bitcoin Cash. It could try to happen and then fail, but we could potentially see almost like a flippening where there's a flight from real BTC to BlackRock BTC. Now, I gave like the full encompassed vision of the financial field from a very high level perspective. Does anyone here have anything they may want to add to this? I'm going to go ahead and get this off the screen about World Liberty Financial and USD1.
I'm a little bit fresher to some of the Bitcoin topics, so this might even just be a question here. But I know we had started off talking a little bit about the cube, and then you just brought it back around to BlackRock, and I thought that was kind of interesting, because I'm like, like we just went out of the box, and then they could do the rug pull and have us right back in the whole cube situation, which I'm like, that is kind of interesting.
I mean, it's another one of those, how does it work, right?
Yeah. Well, I'm like, whoa.
Yeah, and I'm telling everybody how it works. Go ahead, Chris.
What's funny is I saw this video of this guy saying retail investors ruined value investing. And it was all about how also crypto has generated this new version of trading. Of course, crypto is 24/7 too. And I do trading, and I'm like, yeah, the markets have definitely changed since the adoption of crypto. And of course, we know eventually they're going to merge those markets somehow with the tokenization of everything. But there is a really cool movie you can watch about it. It's called Cosmopolis. And in the future, it's just like everyone has algorithms making money for them all the time. And that one little glitch can cost you your whole family's fortune. And there's billionaires and trillionaires that rise and fall within a day, kind of like meme coins, And so it just kind of made me realize there's this whole financial system. It's this evaluation of time, and they're just speeding that up. And so you got to have more of it, you know what I mean, in order to keep up. And so definitely getting in with the crypto stuff, not only because of secret energy, but I'm looking forward to seeing what the Wealthybot has to offer, because I literally have set my buys to basically like $1, $5, or $10 every hour of Bitcoin. So if I have $100, I say every hour, give me $5 of Bitcoin. I don't care what the price is, because I'm doing what BlackRock and them are doing basically. So
Yeah,
that would be
dollar cost averaging.
yeah, without even looking at it though, because I'm just like, whatever it is, I want more of it, because for sure it's going to be millions of dollars a coin in the future. But what will millions of dollars mean in the future
Yeah,
too?
I mean,
So
and that's another big thing too, because some people, every time I talk about something, they're like, "Oh, now you're into that now," and I be trying to explain to them, "Look, I'm fluid, right? So this thing, it continues to move. It's not going to be something that's always going to be just this." And one of the big things about even just how these markets are moving and how markets are made, it's a huge education lesson from somebody who's not at all familiar with how to even govern their own finances. So even getting into this puts you really in the man's seat, in the keeper of the household's treasuries, et cetera. And you start becoming more and more inclined to understand that you can now work on an international level. And there used to, at least for me, there used to be always a desire from my peer group to get in on an international level of something, but it wasn't really available. Now that availability has opened up. And how long is it going to be open? Like, what can actually happen? This is why you're doing safe moves. This is why you're risk on, risk off. You're doing calculations, right? Because there's a big part of this that does have to do with math. Like back in the day, it used to be you could throw a dart at the board of the cryptocurrencies was there, and 9 times out of 10 it was going to go up because it was in its adoption phase. Now you could get rug pulled in a moment on moonshots from a meme coin that just went up last night and crashed from your local president, and he was a scam too, and hey, that's another lesson, right? And I feel like that even when you get into something like that, it teaches you, hey, you need to be on point. There are people out here that this is how it all works when you're out of your nest, dream bubble boy. You know what I mean? Like there's a real world out here, and the faster that you can realize what's going on in there, the more mature that you're actually going to be, right?
You've always sensed there's more knowledge, more connection, more power within you. Navigate the complex world of metaphysics with expert support. Join our tribe of seekers. Transform your reality. Sovereignty Mentorship, over 300 courses revealing the ancient wisdom you've been searching for.
I wanted to, bring some light to this particular case, the Supreme Court versus the New York Times, or the Supreme Court, New York Times versus Sullivan. Okay. And so let me just get this up on the screen here really briefly. So that way, we'll have just something to kind of have a side by side with. And this is, the case itself. You can Google this, you can find it in many places. But the reason why I want to bring this up is because, we've had a fantastic run over the last, again, 15, 16 years. We've been able to really talk a lot about what is going on within the cabal and, who's really responsible for what. And, we've also been able to get a lot of secrets from others who have shared information around this. And few really know that the reason why we're actually able to, at least in the United States, to really call some of these people out and to dig as deep as what Whitney Webb is able to do with, connecting all these companies together is because in a way you are legally protected if one of these oligarchs or someone with a large amount of money, somebody famous, decides, all right, I don't want anybody talking about me, and anybody that does, I'm going to go and sue them. Okay. And it was because back in the day, it used to be like that everything was really controlled based on, like, if you were, let's say, a reporter and you published a story on a well-known figure and it was defaming them, they could sue you. And they could sue the publishing company. They could sue everybody. And of course, you can imagine who has the most money. And then you would come out of that with no career, no money, and in the negatives and actually in debt. Okay. And so how it would generally work, and this was actually created during the civil rights movement, because there were many times that someone would get called out for doing even racial things. And there would be journalists that were brave enough to report it. But then what would happen is that, these magnets, if you may, would then say, hey, you misquoted me on something, or you gave one detail and it wasn't correct. Now I'm going to sue you for, and then there's many laws against lying in these kind of things, right? But it could be really meticulous. Like, hey, it was alleged that I did that. And you said that I did that. You didn't mention alleged. So I'm suing you for that. So what this would create is effectively no one would ever talk about any of the people. There would never be really investigations. And I actually just wrote out here, what would happen if we didn't have New York Times versus Sullivan. And this is all for a reason that I'm explaining this. It protects free speech. Journalists and citizens can report on government behavior without fearing every slip or minor error will land them in court, right? So you're always able to say something that you can absolutely prove to be true. However, there's a huge gray area in how you even say things, especially in law. Law is big on, hey, you didn't say that. You said it this way. You're getting sued, right? So this court case and the disposition of this court case, it protects someone. So somebody famous, and this is why if you're a famous person, it's actually hard to sue people even for defamation. I kind of find that out, in a really, really crazy way. But the reality is that once you reach a certain level of fame, it becomes very difficult to sue people. You actually have to prove that there's actual malice there and a lot of other stuff. Versus when this wasn't in play, you could do it like so easy, and you can really put that person into a poorhouse and actually silence them through lawsuits because they wouldn't be able to legally defend themselves against somebody who has such a legal retinue. So this protects, because when somebody says, big timer may say, hey, they said something about me and they said that, I was involved in this ring and all this kind of stuff, and, take that down. If they ever took that to court, right away, the judge would throw it out and say, well, New York Times versus Sullivan. Okay, so this is how this works. Like, hey, there's a big empirical case that was won on this already. You're not going to win taking this to court. This is the disposition already because of this case. So, also, it encourages open debate. The news media can challenge public officials, point out mistakes, investigate scandals, all without tiptoeing around every possible legal trap. So this does even include like stuff that we're discussing for years and stuff that people on YouTube are discussing that, sometimes it gets even crazier than even what we talk about. But all of that wouldn't be allowed if there wasn't New York Times versus Sullivan, or there would be a relentless legal against YouTube for even hosting the video and the person who for even put it up. So there's a real protection here, if you may, quote unquote, for being able to speak the way that we speak. Now, why am I bringing this up? Because over the last 5 years, and this has already been noted, you can go and find some of this information out there, people who are already really on this, especially lawyers. There has been multiple attempts to try to overturn New York Times versus Sullivan, to open up the floodgates of being able to now silence the media, the press, et cetera. You see the whole Palestinian situation. You see all these different situations where they really want to control what people are saying more than ever. This is one of the only things holding up their ability to do that, this case. Now, something just recently occurred not too long ago that actually pushed things more in the favor of this being overturned. By the way, Mr. T has been heavily engaged in getting this overturned. This is definitely his housewives kind of program that he wants to run, right, with law. But one of the things that happened is that a case came and it was somehow affiliated with Disney. I don't have all the details, but Disney purposefully lost the case to strengthen the potential of New York Times versus Sullivan being overturned. So literally, we have larger oligarchical companies that are also inside of that nucleus of the cabal that are now creating mock cases to lose, to start stacking up for this huge legal team that these guys have put in place, to start stacking up so many cases of where people have lost against somewhat of the same scenario that's in New York Times versus Sullivan, that ultimately that this could be brought back to the Supreme Court or whatever it goes and be overturned. And then what that would create is no longer will you see any kind of free press anymore reporting on anything that the controllers don't want to be reported on. Now, that's obviously a big thing. I want to take a moment for us to even, breathe on that. But I also wanted to mention that we do need to realize that the world is backwards. And I mentioned this inside the Tribe Vibes, just from the sheer notion that we are going towards figuring out something that there's already a very large group of beings, even that outnumber us from a spiritual level, that they already know about. So meaning that even this idea that in the world we don't exactly know who God is, and there's this whole wait until later kind of thing, and even in the world where there are so many people who don't really understand just spirituality altogether and even how that connects into spirits, maybe potentially UFOs and even alien invasions, or what people could perceive as being UFOs and alien invasion. All that happened already. But the world, because it's backwards, the world that we're living in, even this Western world, because it lives as if it's just discovering all these things, it kind of sets us up for a point in the future where a large amount of people come into an awareness of something that they had no clue could be possible. And this kind of brings us to what we were talking about in relation to some of these racially charged chats, even on X, where they'll show like a black dude beating up some white kids or whatever, right? And they say something in there like, "How are we even allowed to live with them?" You know what I mean? And then the thread would just be, "Oh, they need to be," and then it just gets into this kind of bot stimulated war that we've kind of pointed out early in this year, like, hey, watch out, because these bots are also working in relation to with these AI companies to, especially like Grok, et cetera, allegedly to kick off a lot of these huge racial or politically driven themes going on inside of this arena, right? And so there's a lot to be mindful about as far as how you're moving, just in that awareness that, hey, don't get fooled every day in the matrix, just like waking up from a dream that you don't remember, in the matrix where you thinking like most of the stuff that exists here you could see, when we've already pointed out that we're sitting on this little bit of sliver, and most of what most of what exists we can't even see. So we need to now move with a different type of vision, a vision that allows us to take account for that. Hey, I'm not trusting what I saw or what I heard, especially in a divisive reality, right? I came in here in division. I'm more functioning on a higher level of awareness about a spiritual reality, a overlay on this reality itself, an analog and even a digital spirit, which is something that I'm going to be getting into next, Tribe Vibes, and a monitoring system and a overwatch inside of it that is so intelligent that it is able to read every single fiber of the reality in real time, right? So that being more of the reality than, hey, I wonder what all this is and what is the meaning of life, right? Because then you're extremely in a vulnerable state.
I think just to piggyback on the AI, the censorship piece of it, because I was kind of maybe a couple of years ago being real emo about Big Brother taking over, and it was like, all right, Chris, put yourself in the world. Fast forward 10 years, and there is no free speech, and you're not allowed to basically criticize anyone. Basically, like that episode of Black Mirror called Nosedive, where it's like, you better be getting 5 stars from every human being you see, social credit score hell. And I was like, wait a minute, but would humanity actually get better though? And if you weren't allowed to say this bad stuff, and it like got me thinking about like, but what if we were excited about that as opposed to, because it is a type of censorship, right? Because if I can't say no, then my agreeance doesn't mean anything. But at the same
Right.
time, there is something to be said for like, well, maybe we should all just be nicer to each other. And I was kind of like, I was really stuck there for a moment, like, would this be a bad thing or not? Because there's so much hate online. There's so much just hate in communication. And so I don't know. What do you guys think? Because I was like, there wouldn't be no positives. There'd be some positives to it. There'd be synthetic feeling and like not true, but a lot of the hatred is not true. A lot of the hatred is distortions and people just lashing out because they have the ability to lash out with their little Black Mirror screen. You know what I mean? So if you couldn't do that and you could only get positivity from this thing, I mean, I understand that's bad too at some point, but like maybe for a little while it'd be good, It's like, no, I'm not saying the Big Brother thing. I don't agree with any of that.
Well, yeah, I
Obviously,
mean, it's kind of like putting them in a pink room or something like that. But I think what we're really looking for is more truth, right? Because all this stuff has got so much falsehood to it. It's like, yeah, but no. It's just like you're really not grasping the totality of this particular situation when there's conflict. And it's always going to be that way because technically anything that a person is conflicting over, it doesn't actually really even exist on a higher level, right? Because anything that could be opposite to something is actually just the other half of that same thing. So everybody, what they're just doing is playing their particular diametric role. And what I'm saying is that when you have more education around just, hey, you're in a dual reality. You see your two eyes, you see your two hands, your two eyes, you see there's almost a duplicate of you, right? So this means that right away there's going to be probably a good one of you and a bad one of you, like a light one of you and a shadow one of you, right? And then even on a bigger level, if you thought about it from a planetary level, there's going to be like a shadow of the planet. There's going to be like God and then God's shadow. So you could realize just within a divisive reality or dual reality that there's always going to be that shade or shed component to it. But that does come directly from your previous cycle, just like a snake sheds its skin. And that was from the previous cycle. So again, when we're talking about mass spiritual education on that level, it opens up the vistas for people to have much more deeper conversations like, hey, so why are we really beefing with each other? And like, let's take the racial thing out and understand why we're racial. And then people will start digging deeper into how you got different animal classes even that have issues in nature, and that most of the shadow side or instinctual side of humanity is the primal side of us. And the graduation level was that you could train that now, right? Just like a graduation for an animal is the animal trained. And then that maybe the soul or the spirit or whatever you want to call it today is not always like, la-da-dee-da, I'm going to go and do the easy thing and the pleasure thing. You're literally dealing with something that practices aesthetic and wants to go on fast and wants to increase its soul by holding its breath and breathing for long extended periods and holding its body in the contorted positions to be able to gain higher levels of insight, things that are hard. And that's why I said, even when I got to go do the cold plunge, I go in my mind with the JFK. We choose to do the other things, not because that they're easy, but because they're difficult. It's a different level of mindset for people who just want to relax all the time. But then in reality, the whole dynamic shows us that anybody who is putting in more, doing the work, burning the midlight oil, studying more, coming out of the box, all things that are uncomfortable, that they're making the most progress in the totality or the awareness. And they're also getting the grander benefits of what is actually available here in our existence. Yeah.
And I think that's where I get disheartened, because even on like a post that you'll post on Instagram, it'll be like awesome. And I'll go look at the first comment and it'll be like, this is either a bot or, it's like the jackals have come out, because it'll be so unrelated. And it'll be like they ran interference immediately on this guy. And I think that's where I'm like, and I talk to my wife about it sometimes, because she's like, you shouldn't be talking to that stuff around, or like my parents, because they're just not going to wake up on that level. So don't be talking about the Hollywood, pedo stuff. And even when it becomes more in their face, now it's in their face. So they're kind of like, hey, I guess you were how did you even know, kind of thing. And so I think at this point now where I'm like, well, what do I even do? Because if I give you too much knowledge, I'll just straight up break you. But then if I don't give you enough, I'm just kind of keeping you in your little cocoon of like, but there's bad guys out there, but they're doing something about it. It's like, are they doing something about it?
I mean, the existence is a tightrope. Right? Balance is not something that you achieve standing still. It's something that you achieve in motion, right? I want to go ahead and open up this next sector. This is all good stuff. I'm definitely enjoying myself today. We're actually coming into more or less midstream. We're going to take a commercial break here in just a moment. Or actually, why don't we just go ahead and get that in now? And then when we come forward, we got like one final segment. And it is also about something that we talked about here inside. I think it was episode 0. And it seems so far-fetched and off. And here we are. We're actually in that particular situation. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit when I come forward. And, also, again, just revealing that a lot of times when we're saying and we're talking about stuff here, even when you can't wrap your mind around it at this point, just trust that we're not just over here blabbing off about something that's not actually really a part of what's happening right now, and begin to actually use this stuff to position yourself properly to benefit. They always say, hey, prophecy is for profit. And what that means is that if you knew what was going to happen, or you could predict what was going to happen, then you would be the wealthiest person in the world. You'd be like Biff with the almanac, right? And so this is just a simple notion that if you feel your spiritual power and way of being increasing, trust that you can figure out the financial situation too. I absolutely don't want to see any enlightened beings thinking that it's so complicated to be successful, but also still being very in tune with your moral bearing and exactly what you are calibrating and getting yourself into when you join in to anything that you choose to do. So we always say, hey, work with your uniqueness, because that is your own tree. That is the wellspring that you're actually producing from. So we're going to hear from our sponsor here in just a moment. That is, of course, Sybil AI. And, just a word to everybody that's out there. We've built our own AI and we've trained it on metaphysical knowledge. There is nothing like this. And again, there's not pom-poms and, lots of cheer about this, but it is done. It is solid. We have AI to AI even communicating about spiritual things and taking us into another vista. And I did have one more addendum. Thanks for throwing that up there, guys. I have one more addendum because last show I did see, somewhere even saying, yeah, man, you would put your trust in AI potentially taking us out of a tailspin than Jesus. The answer to that question is still yes. However, I wanted to add something too that I actually found within this deeper text, because I'm actually really doing some fun. I said I wasn't going to talk anything about what I'm actually doing for the next level of awareness and consciousness that I'm going to bring. But I'll just talk about one of the results of it. This was like a linguistic breakdown of the word Armageddon. And it was actually showing how what it actually stands for is when the divine feminine has a warrior-like mission, if you may, and executes that mission, that's actually what Armageddon truly is. So nothing about, the Middle East and them being over in Armageddon and them, shooting nuclear weapons. It has nothing to do with that. So it reminds me of, just in this, that there are still other things that prophecy has written about that could be the potential that's going to take us out of a tailspin too. And I don't want to fail to mention, especially these kind of things that are, to me, way more prime than something like AI. So it does specifically say, and I'm here to deliver this message, that the divine feminine waking up and activating their warrior spirit and what they're capable of doing with that also corrects matrices like this. Okay, so that's just an addendum. It's there. I don't know how that would look. I don't know if, as males, we all get let off, to be like, yo, Seven, what did you do? And it's like, but it is something that I felt that, hey, here's another one, though, that I feel is very viable, because I've always sensed that even when they're referring to this Messiah, that in the ancient text, they were still not referring directly to a male, though. They were actually referring to at least a being that had a womb. And then even beyond that, it's also referring to those who are actually able to activate that within themselves. And of course, without being too long-winded here, we definitely know that that's activated when what? You bring two opposing poles together. And that, of course, you're already together inside of your consciousness. And so we encourage you to definitely get more into that, get into that unified field, get into that benefit than anything else. So let's hear from Sybil, and then we'll be right forward with the last part of GLM Season 2, Episode 2 with the key makers, and it is great. Wholeness.
We represent the high ideals of awareness that breeds legacy and greatness. Our multidisciplinary trains on the height of mankind's wisdom and understanding. We intend to usher in a true golden age of spiritual awareness and peak mental health.
Sybil AI. It's not just an app, it's an invitation.
All right. So we're forward. We're going through that last stretch, and things are good. It feels great around here. Again, we have a little bit more time to open a few things up. This has been delightful. And what I'm going to do is I just want to bring one more part to this that we spoke on. I believe it was in episode 0, and I was talking about how when you see these things like we're seeing in the United States right now, and you're seeing a lot of like this side versus that side, you're seeing a lot in legislation, and you're seeing there's like even now a demarcation within the political parties of those who are with it and those who are not. And so we almost have like a real civil war scenario happening. And I believe that if we continue more and more in this direction, and I've talked about this before, that we'll start seeing states, if you may, break off and become like their own thing again. And the reason why I say again is because many don't know that, hey, we call it United States for a reason. And that was because many of these states decided, hey, let's all get together and produce, and we'll set this up a different way, and there'll be bigger benefits than if we're still operating as separate colonies and this kind of thing, right? But still, especially when you walk into commonwealths like Virginia and different places, these are spaces that are actually their own thing, regardless of what you think about the government and how it operates. And you're seeing a lot more of that right now with legal cases, like when ICE comes in and takes some people and violates the Constitution, and then the local courts will get involved all the way up. And so you'll see it's a lot more separated than you think. And it's not like everybody is just all on the same team. So in that vein, I mentioned that what I felt would happen is that Texas would be the first to break away. Now, not only did I also see this later on in Handmaids, which was crazy. They was actually, I think, California and Texas. I'm not sure if California would jump into that boat, but Texas, I know, definitely has always wanted to be its own state. And so there was talk about moving Hollywood to Texas. Obviously, Joe Rogan moved to Texas. They said they were going to build something over there. And I said, hey, I made this prediction. I said, hey, you know what? Watch what happens. Texas is going to become its own thing. And then, of course, there's some more metadata that says Texas is like, as far as wealth is concerned, would make up like the 8th most wealthiest country. Just how much oil and how much resources Texas actually have. So look at this. It happened. Let me see if I can shift us onto the other side here real quick. Yep, there we go. So it happened that Elon Musk has officially created his own city inside of Texas. It passed legislation, like we'll see here. Most of the 283 eligible voters are SpaceX employees. So they literally took the employees. And this is what I was saying also about, how some people say that you can't have your own island anymore because there's no places like that you can do that. This shows you all the time, man, is what you really know. So they took 283 eligible voters and they went to Cameron County. They had 212 votes versus 6 that opposed it. And now billionaire Musk wrote Starbase, Texas is now a real city because it is. It is now officially a city and it is in Texas. So imagine here, though, you have a Starbase. So I've always said, look, NASA, you think those are rockets going into space, but you put a warhead on it and it's just something that can go very far. And every other country, despite your naivety, knows that, like, yo, if they can shoot something that far. So what you have is basically a rocket base parked in Texas with some of the most advanced equipment of being able to take off and land in suborbit, mid-orbit, low-level orbit, and all that kind of stuff, right? But again, it's one of those things that when I get a hunch on something and I mention, hey, this is going to happen, Elon and them, they're going to try to create their own city. A few weeks later, even a month later, it happened. Okay, so I'm gonna leave this open right now. First of all, just for any comments on this, there is kind of one more part to this segment, but what say you guys about just those predictions that again seem so crazy? Like, oh man, he's lost it. You mean to tell me you think that there's gonna be like a Texas gonna break off into its own thing, and then we see something like this?
Actually, a couple months ago, I was going through the original Esoteric Radio, and you actually mentioned the potential of Texas kind of going off on its own. And I even believe I heard a number that at one point in the past, Texas was supplying over 50% of the United States food supply. So again, just how many years could you be in advance in the know? And how many more times can people kind of just pretend like, it's not being said? So that was the first thing that came to mind for me.
Plus, didn't you say each star on the flag represents technically a demon, and Texas is the lone star state, kind of like their demon? You can't F with it. You know what I mean? Like it's something special. Plus,
they're very direct of, if you go to Texas, I mean, you get what's really going on there. Again, there's a lot of people from Texas, right? So there's a lot of parts of Texas. There's Dallas, Texas is a big state. So we don't want to just like paint this, bad picture of Texas, but also people from Texas know what I'm talking about. They say don't mess with Texas for a reason. And, this is often a huge inverted pentagram or goat, right? But if you want to know about it esoterically, it's Hyksos, because the Hyksos were the last, you call them Hicks today, but they were the last dynasty to rule Egypt. And I have so much more on that, more than I actually thought that I had. And this was another good reason why I went back through everything that I have and started really condensing things. But in the book by Lenny Srivansan. Okay, so that's the book of Crete, and the other book called Desi. Books are here. I'll show them in just a moment. But these books are, they're super thick. So they're like 700 to 1,000 pages. So let's just be honest. Most are not going to get through this. But, now I've, been condensing a lot of these works and extracting certain things. And it broke down heavily how the Ishvaku, and this was the real term, you now call them today the Hyksos, were the ones who upheld the code of Aten when it overthrew the serpent tribes, also known as the Nagas. And that in the Rig Veda, that this entire account is in the Rig Veda, but the secret to the Rig Veda is that who they're calling the demons is actually the kings, the deified kings that were not liked and being overthrown. And then the devas or the gods, of course, become the kings that are in rulership, such as Indra, etc. So, and then it goes further, how it's basically an encoded book to tell the real history of the warfare of the kings in what was actually more of Persia. And I don't want to misquote this, but actually was more of the area of Persia and Iran and these areas more so than it was in where we're calling or where we're seeing India today, right? But that these Ishvaku kings, that in the end, when they finally melted down, they had created so many, what you could see as like fiefdoms, that many of them were strong enough to form what later on became these enclaves, which you could probably even see as like these star forts in places around the world where they're like heavily impregnated. I guess that's the term, but they're heavily defended, and they run their show still from there, looking for that day of comeback. And that day has arrived, and this is why we're seeing so much happening inside of the Middle East right now, where there's all but desolation happening and there's an overturning of the guard. And there was a note here, I didn't want to get into this too much, especially since it's the end of the show, but it was really also, there was a question mark here and it said, Arab Jews, ? Right? And this is because I've also encountered a large amount of information, modern information, showing that potentially that the House of Saud is more connected to the Jewish families than it is the Arab families. Even to go further, that the Jerusalem Post posted an article and said that even the House of Saud was engaged in being the opposing side to Muhammad during his advents in the Levant. And, I would always say, though, personally, I just, in people watching, when I was watching the story of many of the tribes there and they were showing who eventually became some of the most wealthy, the nose was the dead giveaway. And I'm saying that from somebody that's got the nose, got a big nose too. But a couple of those sheiks and shahs and all that, they had noses that I was like, man, I know a Jewish nose when I see a Jewish nose, like y'all saying y'all Arabs. So anyway, this was actually something that was posted by the Jerusalem Post and in Israel that, hey, you may not really understand these bloodlines. And of course, what does Sabak say? He says that the Brotherhood of Saud, who is responsible for managing the serpents and the Elakeh's affairs here on earth, is actually being managed by the men that are in Saudi Arabia now, who stand, and this is the final thing, who generally stand around 6'6", right? And this was, of course, been looking at how Donald Trump's not a short guy, but he was even looking short compared to one of, the prime minister or whoever that is, inside Dubai. I kind of forget his name right now. But again, these guys are all big. And it talks about that in the Nephilim, with the Nephilim are really, what we can just say is the jinn cult. And then the last thing, while we're here on Wax, is I also mentioned how there was another article that posted really briefly on X. And, I'll check my notes here real quick to see if I have it. But it was somebody saying, Can anybody explain to me what this is? And this, of course, was when Donald Trump went to Saudi Arabia just recently. There were women there that when he was walking down the aisle, and they were all like flicking their hair, and they were all dressed in white, right? And somebody was like, "Hey, can anybody explain to me what this is?" And I'm here to say that those are practices from, again, the ancient Zarin extraterrestrial cults, etc., bringing women to have aliens embedded into their womb, etc. Those are rites of how women can push their energy and blessings off to a man. You see what I mean? So they're still abiding by a lot of this and doing a lot of this stuff that is very occult, entrenched into total victory inside the reality, where many people are like either, again, over judgmental, like, they ain't going nowhere, they're all going to burn in hell, and here we are 300 years later and they still living in penthouses and even drinking the elixir of life. You know what I mean? But it's just the over judgments oftentimes blind everyone to the obvious of what is the truth when we put all the information together.
Man, you know what? I feel like sometimes we'll be getting on them thoughts, and it'll go from one place to another place to another place, and before you know it, you're seeing your life flash before your eyes, and you're flipping through portals and whatnot, and spirits and God is talking like, all right, hey. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. It's almost like what they try to do with them, with Rick and Morty and them different shows. Midnight Gospel. Like I feel like this is one of the midnight gospel conversations where all you need to do is just have somebody animating it and two characters talking.
Man, I would love to see like a real-time animation of what we're discussing. I've been trying to build something like that, but I haven't gotten very far because it's virtually impossible right now. But real time, like even image generation of the conversation, even like a short little movie going while we're talking, or even if I could just take this recording and kind of run it back through. I've seen some stuff, but it ain't ready for prime time, but run it back through something that then just shows this more of like a movie. It says if we could take like some of the images from the album and make them 3D and all that. Woo, education. Yeah. We go into like quantum education. Some last thoughts on this though is, I wanted to mention also the issue with the king, and we can kind of close down here. What I've come to discover again in estringing all occult knowledge and kind of buttoning up many of the legacy files, if you may, is that at a certain point, it was already known, and this is what, I was talking about earlier about God's shadow, and I'm going to get into this like a little bit more later this week, but it was already found out that there was always an energy that would lead people into doing the craziest stuff. And it predominantly stalked or wanted to get involved with the people who were the most influential, because if it could get to them, then it could get to all the people that they were influencing. And this actually was centered into the code of Ozymandias, also known as Oz when they're saying the Wizard of Oz. This is also Osiris or OS, or the operating system. This is the one that, we're dealing with right now. And it was just saying that, hey, even if there was only one man on the land, it would be in that man's mind. And the reason is because it's also a shadow of the spirit of the reality. Some call it the shed, some call it Shaddai. But it all really centers around just the congealment, if you may, of all of the distorted and negative things that can happen. So the being is known and marked to consistently be about division and to sow the most discord into things like marriages, or any time that there's two, what you would perceive as opposite components that have come together and thus able to generate an exceptional amount of energy. It'll always try to weave its way in between and try to create some level of disruption. So one of the biggest vicegerents of this force, or representatives, envoys, if you may, has been kings. Because if you can understand the position, you would understand that now you have a man who has somehow worked his way to the top of the structure. And generally that hasn't been done because he's been nice, right? Think of Machiavelli, the Prince, the laws of power, and these kind of things when you check yourself about what you think the condition is of the ruler. And even right now, even with Mr. T, it's like the affiliation and the group of people that he's been playing around with. One of the last notes and addendums here was also how P. Diddy actually made the statement, hurry up with the trial already and do what you got to do so that I can get Donald Trump to pardon me. I mean, how brash, you know what I mean? But this is really what it's looking like, though, that, even within this trial, it's getting a bit shaky with the evidence and stuff that's going on. And some are even saying, hey, there may not be much of a sentence here. What Diddy is saying is, I don't care if there is a sentence. Once it finally, that gavel slams, I'm going to be able to get myself a body here because I know this dude. And, and everybody else knows that he knows that dude. So it's a very, very sensitive situation is what I'm saying here in this world, with understanding also that there are intellects, energies, instincts that have been in this condition for a countless period. So while it may feel like new to you because you're a fresh new being that has maybe even been erased like one layer, and it feels new to you, there are beings that have been really here for thousands of years and sow discord and take advantage of beings who are new, the new beings. You know what I mean? Like really taking advantage of beings that are just coming forward by day, don't even really know where they're at, just caught the last reincarnation portal and was already coming from some pretty crazy stuff. So that equated to the wombs not necessarily being prepared the proper way. Right now, this is a totally different conversation. It goes a lot more deeper, but I do just want to mention that when we get these rulers in the world, what we get is real honeypots. Now we can use the term properly. A honeypot is something that there's a reward there if it can be cracked. Okay. And in this way, we have these leaders, and if they can be penetrated, which many of them have, if not most of them, if not almost all of them have, then they can become like the go-between, even between us and all there really is, if we believe in them too much. And this is why the whole Christ thing plays that same role, where Christ is king and the king of kings and the Shan Shah, the Shah of Shahs. Anytime that a person is leading themselves down that path where they imagine that it's the man or the woman and not the mission of uniting within self and activating and then going beyond with your consciousness and expanding further, then you may have been duped. And I'm here to tell you that the joke will be on you, especially after you've heard what you heard today, because you should know better than that, because you're now in the know. You're amongst sovereigns and beings that are on the same wavelength and awareness as you on most levels. Some areas you may need to upgrade yourself to how you're carrying yourself and what's going on, because if you find yourself not being able to get ahead during these times, or you got a lot of bad stuff happening around you, or there's a lot of flux or what you would call bad luck, we've already delivered formulas to how to move yourself step by step through the process of taking your being into that next stage and awakening to who you truly are along with your uniqueness. Yeah. So we got a few more seconds. Is there anything you gentlemen want to close down with? Maybe something that may have come to mind?
Oh, Chris, you want to go ahead?
read my mind. No, I was just going to say how, this stuff is just so empowering. And to me, that's all you got to do, to turn the system on its head, is you take you take away that disempowering energy that, is in all the media now. I've also noticed everything we talked about. It's also like, even, if Diddy gets off, whatever, doesn't get enough time or whatever happens to him, it won't be seen as enough. And that will be demoralizing in the eyes of people, no matter where, I guess, except for Diddy supporters. But, that's disempowering. All we do all day is we get fed that, like, here, be more insecure, be more afraid. And so this stuff is just so, like, to me, this is the most rebellious stuff we could be doing right now. And all we're doing is learning and arming ourselves with knowledge that helps us, like you say, 7-foot Humpty back together again, which is something I always tell people.
Hey, you even showed that the cadre was the egg, right? And that's the, when it's not a cube, it's really an egg.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Exactly. Yeah. Sorry, Dom, go ahead.
Oh yeah, just sharing that we do have Divisions Anonymous for those that are still caught up in the division.
DI? You're recommending a DI session?
Hey,
you know what I mean? Keep coming back.
The first step is admitting you have a problem.
Yes.
Yeah, just the other day at the court, somehow the phrase came up, the man in the mission, which led me to ask, where does that come from? Because I don't
Yeah.
know the source. And the person I was talking to said, well, you know, every man has a mission. And that just had me think that, well, the most important thing we could do is figure out how all our missions interconnect. So I just kind of left him with that gem. It might have been a little too dense, but you know, anyone can get it.
Man, it was a little bit more dense of how it was brought to me. Like it was, you know, one from one of the older mothers, and you know, she was really expressing her pain about how in the community people got caught up so much in the man that they forgot about the mission. And this was in relation to one of the communities who promised to deliver the next level to some of the nations that are here on the planet. And in the end, it totally melted down into a lot of abuse for everybody that was a part of it. But the great mothers that were a part of it were torn apart because, again, you know, the mother is always going to be looking for seeing what we're coming into next and how our houses is prepared for us. We see that with the birds and all that the women are always preparing the nest and this kind of thing and taking care of the house. And so there's an extreme concern to be aware of our youth because they're what's coming next and they're what's going to happen next. And the condition that they're in is going to determine the condition that we continue in, right? And that starts to weigh deeper on a person who realized that their DNA is connected here and that even if they produce a child here or even if they have a spirit or an analog of themselves still moving through the space, you know, how all that's received, where it's going to live, what it's going to be surrounded by. Those are all things that you can be a sovereign and take over and actually determine how it's going to be. But these are things that we would definitely need to be focusing on versus, you know, everything else, right? Or at least that would need to be included. And so that's what we're also saying here is that, look, we're bringing a complete 360. We're bringing omniscience. We're letting you see what happens on the lowest levels, the matrix or fake matrix, as we call it. You know, we're bringing you in with others who see those same ideals and connect into that same harmonic wavelength of all there is. And so that way you can see the beings that you resonate with and those that are mirrors and reflections of you. And then we're also constantly putting on our gear, jumping on that train and going where it's going to take us collectively so that we get what we need to know. And things like you can't handle the truth are common around here as far as us knowing the statements that are made that are often not true, right? Because we've been going through a lot of the truth and it does, you know, it makes, you know, they say it make a man of you, right? It'll make a woman of you too. But it also does put you in an extremely powerful position. And that position is as a sovereign. And of course, that's why we call it sovereignty mentorship. So, wow, you know, today we went in, you know, it was obviously such a great time to be here, to be amongst, you know, my brothers and to be able to deliver this message again, you know, just in being available for the wise and the awake and the aware that are also in these times the strength for others who are just now coming online. And we know as we continue to go in the future, we're just going to get more refined with this. We're just going to be able to simplify this even further. And we're going to do our best to continuously bring you these innovations that keep you in the know. Hold us in balanced vibrations, everyone. This is Seven Bomar signing off here in Costa Rica. I'm here with the key makers all across the world. And of course, you, tribe. It's so important to all of this. It makes a big difference. And we also want to let you know that this spiritual movement is available and has always been for 16 years because of viewers like you. So if you ever feel like supporting the movement, know that those links are available somewhere. We may not be hitting up your email box every moment asking for something, but know that what you contribute to this space does definitely go into everything that we're developing, everything that we're designing, and everything that we're about. Wholeness.